Agatha Christie taught millions how to solve a mystery. Then she became one, and the world stopped seeing the woman. In 1926, grief and the collapse of her marriage were followed by 11 missing days that the press quickly turned into public entertainment. Some called it a publicity stunt. Others treated it as hysteria or a mystery worthy of one of her own novels. The evidence has never settled every question, but the fascination created its own verdict. History kept the abandoned car, the search, and the unanswered ending. What it blurred was the private fracture underneath, an exhausted woman whose pain became more valuable once it could be sold as a puzzle. By the middle of the 1920s, Agatha Christie had built a reputation around order. Her stories began with disruption, but they did not leave readers trapped inside it. A body was discovered. Suspects offered conflicting accounts. A letter, a timetable, or a careless remark changed the meaning of everything. By the final pages, the detective gathered the facts and explained what had happened. That structure gave readers something real life rarely provided: completion. Every lie could be tested. Every contradiction mattered. Every secret would eventually face the light. Christie allowed her audience to enter a confusing world with the promise that confusion would not have the final word. Hercule Poirot became the clearest expression of that promise. He did not depend on force or dramatic pursuit. He watched people. He listened to the words they repeated and the details they avoided. He understood that pride, fear, and vanity could expose more than physical evidence. When he finally explained the case, disorder became readable. This method made Christie increasingly successful. The Murder of Roger Ackroyd was published in 1926 and brought wider attention to her work. It showed how precisely she could manipulate a reader's assumptions. She was not yet the global institution she would later become, but her name carried growing authority. Her public image began to follow the logic of her books. Readers saw discipline because the novels were disciplined. They saw calm because the prose was controlled. Christie appeared to be a woman who could place several motives inside one room and keep every thread from breaking. The image was flattering, but it created a dangerous assumption. People began to confuse control over fiction with control over life. A writer who could expose deception on the page was expected to recognize every deception around her. A woman who could end a fictional crisis was expected to remain composed when a real one entered her home. The stronger her reputation became, the harder it was to see the ordinary woman behind the books. Intelligence did not tell her how to repair every wound. Fatigue, grief, confusion, and fear did not fit easily beside the emerging image of the Queen of Crime. Christie did not build that myth alone. Publishers, reviewers, and readers helped create it because it made the books more satisfying. The calm author became part of the promise. She appeared to stand outside disorder, watching it, measuring it, and deciding when the truth would arrive. But a novelist controls only the page. A sentence can be revised. A weak motive can be replaced. A clue can be moved before publication. Human beings do not wait for revision. They change their minds, conceal their intentions, and leave damage behind without offering a clean explanation. The same woman who arranged fictional evidence still lived inside ordinary routines. She wrote letters, managed a household, raised a daughter, and depended on people whose choices she could not control. Her intelligence did not make her immune to loss. Her success did not protect her marriage. Her ability to understand invented motives did not guarantee that real people would behave fairly. This difference would become central to everything that followed. The public saw an author who restored order. It did not yet see the woman whose own private order was beginning to fail. Nothing in Christie's fiction had prepared her audience for that contradiction. They knew how to read her clues, but they did not know how to read her pain. When the crisis came, many would approach her life as if it were another book. They would search for design, motive, and a final solution. But before there was an abandoned car, a police search, or a false name written in a hotel register, there was a quieter story. A daughter lost her mother. A wife learned that her husband wanted another woman. The structure she had trusted began to break. Then life presented Agatha Christie with a mystery she had not written. The collapse did not begin with a body in a library. It began inside a home where certainty could no longer be maintained. Before Agatha Christie became a national mystery, she was a daughter in mourning. In April of 1926, her mother died. The loss came during a period when Christie was already balancing work, marriage, motherhood, and the growing pressure attached to her name. On the page, she could arrange cause and consequence. At home, there was no final chapter capable of making absence orderly. Her mother belonged to the part of Christie's life that existed before publishers, reviews, and public success. That relationship carried history, familiarity, and a sense of permanence. When it ended, ordinary routines continued, but one of Christie's oldest sources of emotional security was gone. The public would later examine her actions for clues. Many accounts began with the abandoned car, the hotel register, or the surname Neal. Fewer began with the simpler fact that she had spent much of that year grieving. The timing matters because grief did not arrive alone. Later that year, Archie Christie told his wife that he wanted to end the marriage. He had formed a relationship with Nancy Neal. The woman whose surname would later dominate newspaper speculation was, at this point, not a clue in a mystery. She was part of a marriage breaking apart. Archie's decision changed the structure of Christie's private life. The home she had treated as secure no longer offered the same certainty. The husband beside her was preparing to leave, and the request came while she was still dealing with her mother's death. Those facts do not explain everything that followed. They do establish the pressure surrounding it. It would be easy to make Archie the single villain of the story. That would create a cleaner narrative than the evidence allows. His affair and request for divorce were real. So was Christie's grief. So was the strain of maintaining work and family life while the structure around her continued to shift. No theory is required to see that 1926 had become a year of repeated loss. Nancy Neal's surname later carried extraordinary force because it connected betrayal to identity. When Christie was eventually found registered under that name, the public treated the choice as if it must contain the solution. Some saw revenge. Others saw calculation. But a repeated surname can invite interpretation without proving motive. By late summer, Archie had made his position clear. He wanted the marriage to end. Christie faced a decision made by someone else, while her own emotional reserves were already reduced. The woman known for controlling fictional plots was living through events she could not revise. This was the first serious break between her public image and private reality. Readers saw discipline, intelligence, and calm. Her home contained grief, betrayal, and uncertainty. The gap widened, though the public had not yet seen it. Christie continued to work. She continued to manage family responsibilities. From the outside, the familiar image remained intact, but the household behind that image was becoming less stable. On the 3rd of December, 1926, the tension reached another point. Accounts describe an argument between Agatha and Archie that evening. The exact words remain private. What can be said with confidence is that the dispute came after months of grief and marital conflict. It was not an isolated scene without context. Later that night, Christie kissed her daughter Rosalind goodnight. The detail has survived because it is ordinary. There was no public announcement and no prepared explanation. A mother entered her child's room, offered a familiar gesture, and then left the house. She drove away in her Morris Cowley. That action would soon be treated as the opening move in a national mystery. At that moment, it belonged to a woman whose private supports had narrowed within a single year. The record does not settle her intention. It should not be rewritten as a carefully designed act of revenge. It should not be diagnosed from a distance as proof of one specific medical condition. She may have wanted space after the argument. She may have been acting under severe strain. Later, theories would claim much more, but the evidence does not allow certainty. That uncertainty is essential. Christie became famous for plots in which strange actions eventually revealed a clear motive. Her own disappearance did not provide the same guarantee. What had changed was clear. In April, her mother died. Later, Archie asked for a divorce. By December, the marriage had reached open conflict. Nancy Neal's name had entered the story before the public understood how much attention it would later receive. Christie's fiction offered clues that moved toward explanation. Her life now contained facts that moved only toward uncertainty. That was not a failure of intelligence. It was the difference between writing events and living through them. Before she became a case, she was a woman facing grief and abandonment in the same year. Before strangers debated motives, she had already lost 2 forms of security. The public would soon read every detail as design. The known facts first described rupture. That night, the Morris Cowley carried her away from the house. By morning, her absence would no longer belong only to her family. The private fracture was about to become public property. On the morning of December 4th, 1926, Christie's Morris Cowley was found at Newlands Corner in Surrey, close to the edge of a chalk quarry. Personal belongings remained inside, including clothing. Christie was nowhere nearby. The discovery changed the scale of the case at once. What had begun as a family emergency became a police investigation and a national story. The location encouraged darker theories. A car left near a steep drop could suggest an accident, an attempt to disappear, or something more serious. None of those possibilities could be confirmed from the vehicle alone. But uncertainty did not slow the newspapers. It gave them more material. Police searched the surrounding countryside. Bloodhounds were brought in. Thousands of volunteers joined the effort, moving across fields, woodland, and nearby roads. The number of people involved reflected genuine concern, but the case also carried unusual excitement. A rising mystery writer had vanished in circumstances that seemed to resemble the opening of one of her own novels. That comparison became difficult to control. Reporters described the abandoned car as a clue. Every object inside it was treated as if Christie had placed it there for interpretation. Readers were invited to study the case as though a solution had already been designed and hidden somewhere in the evidence. The search quickly moved beyond ordinary police work. Newspapers published updates and theories. People who had never met Christie offered explanations for her behavior. Some suspected an accident. Others wondered whether she had chosen to disappear. A few placed Archie under suspicion. The known facts were still limited, but the public narrative expanded every day. Famous writers were drawn into the case. Arthur Conan Doyle, who had a serious interest in spiritualism, took one of Christie's gloves to a medium in the hope that it might reveal where she was. Dorothy L. Sayers visited the area where the car had been found. Their involvement showed how far the case had moved beyond a private family crisis. It had become a national event in which literature, police work, rumor, and public curiosity were beginning to mix. The press had a reason to keep that mixture alive. A clear answer would have ended the story. An unresolved disappearance could fill front pages for days. Each failed search created another headline. Each theory invited another round of speculation. Christie's profession made the coverage more intense. If an unknown woman had vanished after a marital argument, the story might still have drawn attention. But this missing woman wrote about clues, false identities, and concealed motives. Her work encouraged the public to believe that every detail must have been deliberate. That assumption placed a burden on facts that could not carry it. The car showed that she had left it behind. It did not explain why. The coat showed that she had departed without it. It did not reveal her state of mind. The quarry suggested danger, but it did not prove intention. The public wanted those objects to speak because Christie herself could not be found. In her absence, the car became a substitute for her voice. Reporters, police, and readers each tried to make it say something different. Archie faced questions of his own. The marriage was already under strain, and his relationship with Nancy Neal gave the press another line of inquiry. That did not prove he knew where Christie was. It did make the domestic crisis impossible to keep private. The longer the search continued, the harder it became to separate concern from spectacle. People wanted Christie found alive. They also wanted the case to produce a satisfying explanation. Those two desires were not always the same. For the family, the days carried fear and uncertainty. For the newspapers, each day without an answer increased the value of the story. Christie's disappearance had become larger than the circumstances that preceded it. Her grief, her mother's death, and the collapse of her marriage were being pushed behind the more exciting question of where she had gone. Then, more than 200 miles from the abandoned car, a hotel guest began to attract attention. She had arrived alone. She used a name that connected the disappearance directly to the marriage Christie had been losing. The search had treated every object as a clue. Now, a name entered the case, and the public would treat it as a confession. 11 days after Christie vanished, the search ended far from the abandoned car. She was found at the Swan Hydropathic Hotel in Harrogate, a spa town in Yorkshire. She had been staying there under the name Mrs. Neal, using the surname of the woman involved with Archie. The detail was real. Its meaning was not. A musician at the hotel recognized her from newspaper photographs and alerted the authorities. Until that moment, Christie had moved through the hotel as an ordinary guest. Accounts describe her reading newspapers, joining hotel activities, and spending time in public rooms. Nothing about those routines supplied a clear explanation for why she had left home or how she understood the days that had passed. The name on the register became the detail the public could not release. To many readers, it appeared too exact to be accidental. Some saw revenge against Archie. Others believed Christie had planted the name as a clue. But the surname alone could not prove planning, memory loss, or motive. It showed what she had written in the register. Everything beyond that required interpretation. Archie traveled to Harrogate after she was identified. Reports from the period said Christie appeared to recognize him as someone familiar, but did not immediately identify him as her husband. Doctors and family members later referred to memory loss. That account became one of the main explanations for the disappearance, but it never settled every question. The reunion offered none of the clean resolution the public expected. There was no final gathering, no confession, and no detective explaining the sequence of events. There was a husband, a wife, and a private marriage already close to collapse. Around them stood reporters waiting for a statement that would make the 11 days understandable. Christie left the hotel with Archie and was taken away from the press. Her physical safety had been established, but the pressure did not end. Finding her answered only one question. It did not explain why she had gone, why she had used the name Neil, or what she remembered. That gap became the real engine of the story. The search had ended in practical terms, yet the public investigation continued. The missing body had been replaced by a missing explanation, and that absence proved even easier to exploit. If Christie had returned with a clear account, newspapers might have printed it and moved on. Instead, the silence remained. The public had followed maps, search parties, the abandoned car, and daily reports. Many now felt entitled to the ending. Christie did not provide one. Her silence should not automatically be treated as proof of calculation. A person may refuse to discuss an event because memory is incomplete, because the subject is painful, or because public attention has already caused enough harm. The surviving record does not allow one motive to be placed inside her mind with confidence. What can be said is that the public response changed after she was found. Concern gave way to judgment. The same people who had wanted her safe now wanted her to explain herself. Sympathy weakened as suspicion grew. A missing woman could be feared for. A silent woman could be accused. The press began to frame the absence through competing theories. One account emphasized amnesia. Another suggested a deliberate attempt to punish Archie. A third called the whole episode a publicity stunt. Each version offered the clarity the real event refused to supply. The theories also protected the public from a less satisfying possibility. Christie may have been living through a crisis that did not follow a clean design. Grief, betrayal, exhaustion, and memory can interact without producing a single motive that fits neatly into a headline. That possibility was difficult to accept because Christie's name had become associated with control. Readers expected hidden actions to serve a purpose. They expected strange names to become clues and silence to conceal a final reveal. The habits that made her fiction satisfying now shaped the judgment placed on her life. The hotel register did not end the mystery. It changed its location. The search moved from fields and roads into Christie's private mind. Strangers who could not know what she had experienced began arguing over what she must have intended. She had been found, but the woman had not been returned to herself. The public still wanted possession of the missing days, and because Christie would never give them the explanation they demanded, others began writing it for her. Once Christie returned, the search for her body ended. The search for a motive began. The first explanation was amnesia. Archie and others close to her said she had suffered memory loss. Doctors were consulted, and the account entered the newspapers. It offered a medical frame for behavior that otherwise seemed impossible to explain. But reported memory loss did not settle the matter. Some readers accepted it. Others dismissed it as a convenient story designed to protect the family from embarrassment. The same uncertainty that had driven the search now attached itself to the diagnosis. A second theory presented the disappearance as revenge. Archie had asked for a divorce, and Christie had registered under the surname Neal. To some observers, that combination appeared deliberate. They argued that she had wanted to frighten her husband, expose his affair, or place him under suspicion. The theory had emotional force because it turned the case into a domestic battle. A betrayed wife disappears. Her husband faces questions. The mistress's name appears in a hotel register. The sequence looked dramatic enough to satisfy the public appetite for motive. It still did not prove intent. A third theory called the disappearance a publicity stunt. Christie was already becoming a successful mystery writer. The case had placed her name across newspapers in Britain and beyond. Some critics concluded that the attention must have been the purpose. That accusation carried a particular cruelty. It suggested that Christie had used her daughter, her husband, the police, and thousands of searchers to promote her books. No conclusive evidence established such a plan, yet the theory survived because it made the event feel controlled. Each explanation offered a different version of the same woman. In the amnesia theory, she became unstable. In the revenge theory, she became vindictive. In the publicity theory, she became dishonest. The facts changed shape, but the judgment remained. The theories also reflected how women in crisis were often described. A grieving woman could be called hysterical. A wife facing betrayal could be called manipulative. A successful writer who refused to explain herself could be accused of calculation. Christie's mother had died that year. Her marriage was breaking apart. Those facts did not provide a final answer, but they formed the human context around the disappearance. Much of the coverage treated that context as secondary because grief made a weaker headline than deception. The press did not need to prove one theory. It benefited from keeping all of them alive. Certainty would have closed the story. Competing explanations gave newspapers a reason to revisit the car, the quarry, the hotel, and the name Neal. Christie's profession made every theory more attractive. Readers knew her as a woman who hid motives and controlled information. If she remained silent, some assumed the silence itself must be part of a design. This was the trap created by her own success. Because she wrote mysteries, people found it difficult to believe that her life could contain confusion without structure. Every action had to function as a clue. Every missing detail had to conceal a calculated purpose. The same standards were not applied evenly. Archie's affair was a known fact, but public attention often returned to Agatha's behavior. Her disappearance became the larger moral question. The wife under pressure was examined more closely than the husband who had asked to leave. That imbalance allowed the story to shift away from grief and betrayal. The public stopped asking what Christie had endured and began asking what she had planned. There may never be a complete answer. The surviving record does not prove revenge, publicity, or a fully conscious scheme. It also does not allow modern observers to diagnose her with certainty. What remains is a set of facts surrounded by interpretation. She left home after a marital conflict. Her car was found abandoned. She stayed at a hotel under the surname Neal. She was found 11 days later. Reports described memory loss. She never gave the public a full explanation. Those facts are important. The spaces between them are where the myth grew. Theories gave strangers the confidence to speak for Christie. Her silence was treated as evidence. Her grief became background. Her profession became a reason to distrust her. The woman who had disappeared physically was now disappearing in another way. She was being replaced by versions that were easier to judge. The unstable woman, the vengeful wife, the calculating author. Each version solved the case by reducing the person. Christie had returned from Harrogate, but the public had already built a second disappearance around her. This time, she vanished beneath explanations other people preferred. The public kept asking what had happened. Christie chose a different response. She returned to work. That decision did not erase the crisis. It did show that the 11 missing days would not be allowed to become the final definition of her life. She had been turned into a national puzzle, but she still controlled what she wrote next. In the months after Harrogate, Christie spent time away from the attention surrounding the case. Reports described a period of recovery. She did not return to public life with a detailed confession, and she did not offer readers the final chapter they wanted. Whatever its cause, her silence eventually functioned as a boundary. The marriage to Archie did not recover. Christie petitioned for divorce, and the marriage formally ended in 1928. Archie later married Nancy Neal. Agatha retained custody of Rosalind and continued publishing under the surname Christie. Keeping that name carried practical value because readers already knew it. It also created a strange separation between the public author and the private marriage that had ended. The Christie name remained on book covers long after Archie had left her life. The woman survived the marriage. The brand survived with her. That fact complicates the popular image of Christie as someone permanently broken by 1926. The year wounded her, but it did not end her authority. She continued writing, publishing, traveling, and making decisions beyond the scandal. Her later autobiography treated the period with restraint. She acknowledged illness, sorrow, and heartbreak, but did not provide a detailed account of the disappearance. The missing days remained outside the story she chose to tell about herself. That omission has often been treated as another clue. It may be simpler than that. Christie had already watched strangers examine the most painful year of her life. She may have decided that publication did not create an obligation to surrender every private event. A writer can choose what belongs on the page. The public often treats autobiography as a complete confession. It is not. It is another form of authorship shaped by memory, judgment, privacy, and selection. Christie included the life she was prepared to describe. The 11 days remained beyond that line. Her refusal left later writers frustrated because it denied them a final authority. There was no statement strong enough to close every theory. But the absence of an explanation did not give every theory equal weight. Speculation remained speculation. Christie's life also continued in directions the scandal could not predict. After her divorce, she traveled alone on the Orient Express toward the Middle East. The journey placed physical distance between her and the world that had watched her marriage collapse. Travel gave her new settings, new routines, and new material. In 1930, during a return to Iraq, she met the archaeologist Max Mallowan. They married later that year. The marriage did not erase what had happened with Archie. It showed that the failed marriage was not the only future available to her. Christie built a second partnership around travel, archaeology, work, and a life that extended beyond the social judgment of 1926. She joined Mallowan on expeditions and used parts of that world in later novels. Trains, hotels, archaeological sites, and international travelers entered her fiction with the authority of direct observation. The woman once trapped inside a hotel mystery became a woman who chose movement. That contrast matters. Public memory often freezes Christie at Harrogate, registered under another woman's surname and unable or unwilling to explain herself. Her later life resists that frozen image. She kept producing books. She developed Miss Marple alongside Poirot. Her career eventually became larger than the scandal, even if the scandal never vanished from biographies. Across her career, she published 66 detective novels, 14 short story collections, and stage works that reached audiences far beyond the newspapers that had judged her disappearance. The missing days remained famous, but they were only 11 days inside a life that continued for almost 5 more decades. The public record often reverses that proportion. It places the 11 days at the center and treats everything else as an aftermath. Christie's own actions suggest a different order. She returned to the page. She ended a marriage that no longer protected her. She traveled, she remarried, she built new work from new places. She never supplied a complete public account, and the surviving record does not show whether she possessed one. That silence did not make her powerless. It may have been one of the few parts of the event she still controlled. The newspapers had owned the search. Readers had owned the theories. Christie never supplied a complete explanation. The absence of a complete explanation had a lasting cost. Every generation that followed tried to reopen the case, searching her silence for certainty. Every generation inherited the same unfinished question. What happened during those 11 days? Biographers returned to police reports, newspaper archives, family accounts, hotel records, and the few public statements connected to the case. Journalists rebuilt timelines. Documentary producers revisited Newland's Corner and Harrogate. Novelists imagined conversations no surviving witness had recorded. The evidence remained limited. The interpretations multiplied. Some writers continued to support the account of memory loss. Others argued that Christie had acted deliberately after the collapse of her marriage. A few tried to combine both possibilities, suggesting that an intentional departure may have developed into a period of confusion or dissociation. The public record does not provide enough certainty to establish any one theory as the final answer. That uncertainty should have encouraged restraint. Instead, it often encouraged confidence. The disappearance became attractive because it appeared to offer a hidden Agatha Christie novel inside Agatha Christie's own life. There was an abandoned car, a false surname, a broken marriage, a national search, and a famous writer who refused to explain the ending. The structure was almost too convenient for the public imagination. But real lives are not required to provide satisfying plots. A person may act from several pressures at once. Grief can exist beside anger. Exhaustion can exist beside calculation. Memory can become uncertain without every action losing intention. The desire to escape one situation does not prove a plan to create another. The demand for one clear motive reduced a complicated event into a contest between theories. If Christie suffered memory loss, one side believed the case was solved. If she wanted to punish Archie, another side claimed victory. If publicity played any role, others treated her entire crisis as fraud. The woman herself disappeared beneath the debate. That pattern reveals more than curiosity about one writer. It shows how easily a private crisis becomes public property when the person involved is famous and female, and no complete public account exists. Christie had already supplied readers with hundreds of fictional motives. The public assumed she owed them one more. Her silence denied them that satisfaction. It also prevented any single explanation from becoming official. That may be why the case survived. A confirmed answer might have reduced interest. An unresolved event could be retold indefinitely. The disappearance became a renewable story. Each retelling could choose a different Christie. One version presented her as a wounded wife. Another made her a calculating author. Another turned her into a patient whose actions could be explained through modern psychological language. These versions sometimes revealed more about the era producing them than about Christie herself. Earlier accounts used words such as hysteria and instability. Later accounts preferred trauma, dissociation, or breakdown. The vocabulary changed, but the habit remained. Strangers continued placing conclusions inside a mind they could not examine. What can be said with confidence is limited. Christie left after an argument, and her Morris Cowley was later found at Newland's Corner. 11 days later, she was recognized at a Harrogate hotel under the surname Neal. Contemporary accounts described memory loss, but no complete explanation followed. Everything beyond those facts requires care. The lasting wound was not only the disappearance itself, it was the way the event changed how people read her. Her books were no longer the only mysteries attached to her name. Her private life had become another case, and she could no longer control who claimed the role of detective. Yet the disappearance did not define the work that followed. Christie continued writing for decades. She created novels, stories, and plays that reached audiences across languages and generations. Her career survived the scandal because her skill was larger than the public judgment surrounding one year. Still, the 11 days remained unusually powerful. They offered something her finished novels did not: a mystery without an authorized solution. That is why the event continues to attract attention. The public is not only interested in what happened, It remains drawn to the fact that no complete answer ever entered the historical record. Her silence created a limit, and audiences have spent nearly a century trying to cross it. But perhaps that limit deserves respect. The missing days belonged first to a woman facing grief, betrayal, and intense strain. They became a police case, then a newspaper event, then a historical puzzle. At each stage, more people gained access to the story, while Christie herself became less visible inside it. History preserved the car, the hotel, the surname, and the unanswered questions. It preserved every theory capable of keeping the mystery alive. What it often failed to preserve was proportion. 11 days did not erase a lifetime of work. A private crisis did not cancel her intelligence. Silence did not prove manipulation. Uncertainty did not give strangers the right to invent certainty on her behalf. Agatha Christie taught readers to expect a final explanation. Her own life refused to provide one. That may be the only honest verdict. The world found the missing writer. It never stopped searching for an ending she never gave. If this story changed how you see Agatha Christie, share your thoughts in the comments. Did the public respect her silence or turn it into one more clue? Subscribe to Gilded Women for more stories about the women history remembered through myth instead of truth.